All right, so I'm Keith Miao, this is Fiona Kinnenberg, Anirudh Kumar, Tali Andaman, and we're here to talk to you today about shrimp farming in Bangladesh. First, I'm going to give a quick overview of the industry at large. This is an extensive, low productivity, low technological input shrimp farm in rural Bangladesh. And shrimp farming has been around for a couple centuries now, 500 years ago in Indonesia, 200 to 300 years in Japan. But commercialized shrimp farming began in Norway at the end of the 1800s with trawling, and trawling techniques were applied to shrimp, and this dominated the industry into about the 1970s. And the carrot and stick factors shifted shrimp industry from trawling to trawling and farming in the 1970s. And what happened was, at that time, French researchers in Tahiti were able to make technological breakthroughs in hatcheries as well as feedstock for shrimp farming. The value chain was able to be more optimized from all the fry collectors to the grow out ponds all the way to your dinner plate. The stick was in the 1970s. There was an environmental movement that created backlash against trawling. And yes, what you see here is the result of shrimp trawling, even though I don't think there's many shrimp in the picture. This as well. And so from the 1970s onwards, shrimp was both trawled and farmed, and in the recent era, you can see about 50% of our shrimp production comes from farming, 50% of 6 million tons. Focusing in on Bangladesh, there are about 30 species cultivated. 2 of them are dominant: Bagda, which is brackish water cultivation, and Golda, freshwater counterpart. Shrimp are usually grown in traditional polyculture and make up about 0.5% of GDP. That's $600 million USD in recent years for Bangladesh. It's the second largest export commodity. Most of it is done through extensive farming methods, which imply low input of capital, low technological sophistication, as well as low yields per unit area compared to other countries which farm shrimp, such as Thailand, China, etc. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Tali.
All right, going for a speed through. So we wanted to look at the shrimp industry in a number of ways. And as sustainable development students, we decided to cross both the socioeconomic and ecological challenges of the industry in light of our trip to Bangladesh. Specifically, we focused on the economic development and food security of farmers engaged in the industry, as well as mangrove deforestation and soil salinity in areas where shrimp was being grown. Specifically, what we found is that globally 30 to 70% of mangrove deforestation is due primarily to shrimp farming, and this obviously has a lot of ecosystem services being taken away as a result. Specifically, mangroves provide feeding ground for shrimp as well as a number of fish species in the areas. It also is a buffer for erosion and protects infrastructure and people from cyclones. This is especially important in Bangladesh, where flooding is a major issue, which you will hear about later today. Salinization was also a major factor. As Keith mentioned, Bagda is one of the 2 primary shrimp species being cultivated in the area, and it is done in brackish water. This has serious implications for both the soil salinity in the areas, making it almost impossible to grow rice after a shrimp farm has been used in the area. It's also starting to seep into groundwater. High and low aquifers are getting salinized as a result of shrimp farming. Socioeconomic factors include food security and gender. Specifically, the transition to shrimp farming often means that farmers who are growing food, to feed themselves, are now growing food for sale, and then the money from that profit from that sale is being used to buy food. This introduces a number of factors, including access to markets with a diverse enough body of food. It also has problems for just growing enough food. If there's like a disease or something happens to your industry, you don't have the food to feed yourself as a backup. However, if a lot of these issues are addressed, specifically access to markets and lack of disease, then you do have the potential for monetary gains, more stable incomes, and development. Gender equity was the other issue that we looked at, and specifically farmers in Bangladesh tend to be women, but due to the cultural and religious barriers of the region, it's harder for them to access capital and engage in trade, just given sort of the cultural roles, so this can have a very negative impact on their livelihoods and on their stability and equity. A little bit about what we actually did in Bangladesh. To start, we're going to show you a very brief video.
Yeah, we had probably like at least 7 hours of footage, but we're just going to show you 1 minute of it. Do we have the audio? Oh, Scott.
So He is actually the owner of the shrimp farm, or one shrimp farm.
So first question, what kind of shrimp does he grow?
Both types.
What type? And he owns the shrimp farm?
Freshwater and
The
brackish
freshwater
water.
and brackish water.
And it's his shrimp farm, he owns it?
Bigha?
The shrimp farm is I will convert you to your Bigha. B-I-G-H. Bigha, okay?
What was the land before it was a shrimp farm?
And how long?
কতদিন ধরে আপনি চিংড়ি চাষ করতেছেন ওটা?
ও মেলা দিন।
কতদিন? কত বছর?
10-15 বছর।
10 to 15 years.
ধান চাষ করতে
Rice field. But the land is not here.
What is the production of the shrimp farm?
Well, 3 months.
How many employees is he have? How many people does he?
Basically, one of the major factors to take from the video is that any interview included about 30 people. We were a very popular commodity when we were traveling around Bangladesh. There's not a lot of tourists. But specifically from our field work, we were able to interview 11 shrimp farmers, 9 of which were male, 2 of which were female. About half owned their farms, half leased their farms, and the production ranged from only shrimp to polyculture, including tilapia, carp, and crab. Generalizing the results, obviously keep in mind there are 11 farmers. This is not statistically sound in any way, but 80% of the interviewees were former rice farmers. 84% of them had improved quality of life and food security after changing to shrimp farming. All the people interviewed who had children were in school, and a number of people did actually want to switch back to rice farming just in terms of their cultural and personal preferences, but salinization did play a major role in keeping them from doing that. So just a little bit of a brief interlude into what we did.
Okay, I'm going to very quickly talk about value chains, just another way to look at the shrimp production. So going from the actual farmers all the way up, or from the fry catchers all the way up to the exporters. So just to tell you why I'm doing this, it's to relate the aspects that make up the production costs and identify possible points for intervention and ways that we could reduce costs along the chain and potentially increase profits for the shrimp farmers and improve their quality of life. And just to give you an idea, in Bangladesh, about 1 million people are employed by the shrimp value chain, majoritatively women. And there you can see the value chain, but I don't have time to go through it at the moment. Okay, so to jump to problems along the value chain, one of the main problems in Bangladesh is that due to the extensive nature of the farming, there are, first of all, very low yields compared to those in other countries. So compared to Thailand, they have 17% less, China 17 times lower, China 7 times lower, and India 5 times lower. And so there are various extension services that could help farmers improve the quality of the shrimp, the yield of the shrimp, and then additionally improve quality as well. Then if you look at the chain, the 2 nodes that say Fry, Faria, and Aratdars, and on both sides of the farmers are intermediaries, and there are multiple intermediaries which cause the quality of the fry and then the shrimp to decrease along the chain. And then lastly, their social codes dictate fry catcher and intermediary relationships, and there are a lot of social problems associated with that. Now, one of the ways that people address value chains is to use the increased consumer willingness to pay for quality of certain food products to bring a higher price to the farmer. But in the case of shrimp, people usually aren't willing to pay a lot more for quality, so instead, what they've discovered is to use an enforced willingness to pay through the processors, the shrimp processors, who then ensure a relationship between the farmers and the exporters, and often that can result in a higher quality product. But what's necessary for that is policy measures to be put in place and to have certification standards and sustainability standards, and Ani will tell you a bit about that.
So unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are externalized from the market, right? And we all know that. And so, first of all, we have like the fact that Baghdad is a saltwater enterprise, and like so that's a problem when it comes to soil salinity. And so one of the mitigation strategies we identified was reverting back to a traditional system. And so polyculture is great in the sense that it employs the use of golda, which is a freshwater species, right? And so you're not adversely affecting the quality of the soil. And then there's a self-sustaining system when it comes to the traditional system, in that the rice sort of detritus helps feed the shrimp and acts as feed for the shrimp, and then the shrimp shells acts as fertilizer for the rice. And so what's great about polyculture is that it has potential for labor absorption, right? Because you have a lot of different species that you're farming, and so therefore you need to employ more labor to cater to all of the species that are being farmed. And then also there's greater food security because of the diverse food sources, and then unemployment, alleviation, as I mentioned. And it's important to emphasize the role of Golda because of, like I said before, it's a freshwater species. And also the market price per hectare for Golda is more than 3 times than that of Bagda. So it's just a much more productive and sustainable way to go when we're talking about shrimp farming. And it's also unaffected by the white spot syndrome virus, which is a huge problem when it comes to Bagda cultivation, because oftentimes it'll wipe out entire ponds of shrimp if that virus hits the pond. And so these are 2 things that we should consider when talking about mitigation of the environmental and social impacts of shrimp farming. Fry collection is also an issue because of how destructive it is due to bycatch. And you saw Keith's slides, and you saw how destructive, how low yielding that kind of method is, and there's so much bycatch, right? And so the problem right now is that these government hatcheries they have insufficient capacity, and the shrimp fry that they yield are very, very low in quality. So about 95% of the farmers catch wild fry, and I guess a great way to transition into using a government hatchery is while the government improves quality of these hatcheries, you create a permit or licensing system that sort of trains farmers to use improved catching methods and to reduce bycatch via better handling, storage, and transport. And that's another mitigation strategy we identified. And there's 2 more things that we need to consider when talking about shrimp farming and how it's sustainable down the road. And that is, A, the role of government. Frankly, corruption is rampant in Bangladesh, and transparency is horrible. And we have a statistic for you guys. Its rank is 2.4 out of 10 according to Transparency International. And so there's just not enough oversight over things like land rights, food security, and gender inequality. And I think one of the biggest issues that sort of dictates the livelihoods of these small-scale farmers are land rights. And so there's this concept of cost lands, which basically are government-owned lands, which they lease out to poor farmers or landless farmers, and the government's allowed to repossess these lands at any point it wants, right? So basically, if you're going to get higher tax yields out of a large-scale shrimp farmer, then you're probably going to, I mean, it's in the government's interest to seize the land from these small-scale farmers and give it to the large-scale farmers. And so that, along with the fact that these powerful landholders already engage in things like land grabbing, intimidation, and just like straight-up violence, is a problem. And so I think land rights is probably the hugest issue when it comes to shrimp farming, because it sort of dictates the livelihoods and the path these small farmers take. Because if they don't have land, they contribute to the problem of urbanization, and they end up being laborers without any sort of food security or income stability. And so these are some potential areas of mitigation that we've identified when it comes to shrimp farming, and I think that's how we're going to close. Thanks, guys. And here are pictures of shrimp farms. Here's a high-input shrimp farm. It's intensive, and then the bottom is more extensive, and there's low inputs there and low productivity. So just to give you guys an idea. Thank you.